A win more card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Describes a card that can only be activated when you're already in an advantageous game state, in which case the effect gives you an even greater advantage to help you win the game even more. The problem with these cards is that if you can use them, you were probably going to win anyway, and the card placement in your deck could have gone to more staples that would have helped you get into that winning state in the first place. So starting at number 10, we have Neutron Blast. This is a normal spell card which has the effect where if you control a fusion summon Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, you can make 3 attacks during the battle phase this turn. Additionally, your opponent can't activate any cards or effects when it makes those attacks. And the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon has 4500 attack and no other effects, so having one of those things swing for 3 attacks can basically win you the game if even 2 of those hit directly, or if it attacks into monsters with less than 5500 total attack. So basically, if you get this effect off and successfully attack with the monster, there's a good chance you can win the game. However, one of the caveats to the card is the fact that you need to have a fusion summoned Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon specifically, and it only works on the original Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. There are 2 other Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon fusion monsters, which require the exact same materials as the non-effect version. However, Neutron Blast does not work on them, even though it would be much better if it did. However, the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon did see more competitive play over the years than its other 2 counterparts, because of its distinction of being a non-effect monster that can be cheated out with Fist of the Unrivaled Tenyi, and being one of the highest attack monsters you can cheat out of the extra deck in the early days of the game with Cyberstein. However, Neutron Blast does not work if the monster is cheated out of the extra deck, as it has to be fusion summoned properly. So if you do manage to fusion summon the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, chances are you're in a very advantageous game state, where you don't really need Neutron Blast in order to win the game. Or you dedicate all your resources to getting it out, and you don't have any resources to protect Ultimate Dragon if it gets destroyed by any kind of destruction effect. It's an incredibly impractical card to use because of how hard the monster it's used on is to get out. But if you do get it out, successfully resolve its effect and attack, you'll probably win. And at number 9, we have Nordic Relic Svalinn. This is a continuous trap card which has 2 effects. The first one is if you control an Izir monster, you can use its quick effect in order to negate the effects of all face-up cards your opponent controls until the end of the turn. Additionally, you can tribute a Nordic monster in order to special summon an Izir monster from your graveyard, and it shares a hard once per turn between both of its effects. Now, what makes this card a win more card is purely the fact that it requires an Izir monster to be on the field. The Izir monsters are level 10 synchros, which have incredibly convoluted summoning requirements, and were very difficult to bring out before the Link era, where pretty much all of the Nordic cards that only worked on the Izir monsters were purely win more, because of how difficult those level 10 synchro monsters were to get out. However, the archetype received some new support, and we're one of the lucky legacy archetypes to receive a powerful Link 1 monster, in the form of Gulveig of the Nordic Ascendant, which makes bringing out the level 10 synchro monsters much easier by bringing out 3 Nordic monsters from your deck, but you can just use them to go into synchro some of the boss monsters very easily. And because it's so much easier to go into the Izir monsters, modern Nordic decks actually run Nordic Relic Svalinn and just use it as a normal part of their play to negate all your opponent's cards once per turn. It's essentially a full board negate, and you can use a negate either monster or spell and trap cards. Or if you time it well enough, you can do both at the same time. Because remember, this effect is tied to a continuous trap card, which means you can use this effect whenever you want at spell speed 2, as long as you meet the conditions, which is to simply control an Izir monster on the field. So it can be used as a form of disruption in order to disrupt your opponent's plays once during both players' turns, like a board-wide repeatable imperm. If anything, the only reason this card is number 9 is because it's one of the only win more cards in this list that actually is played in the archetype. However, Nordics do have some other more win more cards, namely all the other Nordic relics, or even Solemn Authority, which is another card that only works with Izir monsters. Basically, if a card only works with incredibly hard to bring out monsters, it almost always falls into the win more category, like our next card on this list. And at number 8, we have Fist of Fate. This is a quick play spell card that only works if you have Obelisk Tormentor on your side of the field, where its effects can't be negated, and it has the effect to negate the effects of one effect monster your opponent controls, destroy it, then apply a lingering effect where your opponent can't use any monster effects with that card's name for the rest of the turn. Additionally, if this card is activated during your main phase, you can destroy all of your opponent's spell and trap cards. So it's kind of like an infinite impermanence tied to a Call by the Grave effect and a Harpy's Feather Duster, while also being an uncounterable effect, so the effect on paper seems kind of amazing. The problem is that it requires a hard to bring up monster to be on the field to use it, and Obelisk the Tormentor requires 3 tributes for the normal summon, and also gets rid of itself during the end phase if you manage to special summon it. Modern support has made bringing out Obelisk the Tormentor a lot easier, but not easy enough for Fist of Fate to have reached the same tier as Nordic Relic Svalinn, where it can be realistically played alongside the main card that allows it to do its job. If anything, Fist of Fate is an excellent example of win more cards, because it has so many good effects tied to it, and it's still not very good, simply because of the activation requirement of requiring you to have a hard to bring out monster. Additionally, the other specific god cards kinda fit this bill, I just chose Fist of Fate because it seems like the best of the bunch, when compared to Blaze Cannon or Thunder Force Attack. And at number 7, we have Super Quantal Mech Sword Magnaslayer. This is a trap card which equips itself to a Super Quant Xyz monster you control, where it gives it attack equal to its rank times 100, as well as piercing battle damage. It has an additional effect where during the battle phase you can send this card to the graveyard in order to make it so the monster it's equipped to can make 3 attacks this turn. So if you have this card combined with Super Quantal Mech King Great Magnus, which has 3600 attack, it can win you the game if the field is clear enough, which is more accomplishable than Neutron Blast, since Magnus actually has an effect that removes monsters from the field. And if it has enough materials attached, it also has a lot more survivability than the non-effect Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. And since the whole archetype for Super Quantals is basically trying to bring out their boss monster anyway, it seems like having a big finisher would be a great idea. Although, people who play the deck often joke that Super Quantal Mech Sword is more of a lose more card rather than a win more, simply because one of the advantages that Neutron Blast has over Super Quantal Mech Sword is the fact that at least Neutron Blast is a spell card and can be activated from your hand immediately. Whereas Mech Sword is a trap card, so you have to wait a turn before you're able to use it. And seeing as it's already a win more card, having to wait even longer to use it generally makes the card almost unplayable. Because you have to remember, when it comes to big boss monsters that take a ton of resources to bring out, just bringing the card out in the first place is a pretty difficult task when you're just trying to play through your opponent's disruption, as any good opponent is trying to stop you from bringing out those big boss monsters. So if you have effects that you can just use on a boss monster in the field, it almost doesn't matter what the effect is because it's probably not going to be worth it. However, in this case, it works on any other Super Quantal Mech monster and not just your big boss monster. And allowing any of those cards to attack 3 times is going to be good. So it's still worth it on this list anyway. If it was tied to only the big boss monster, it probably wouldn't be on this list because it wouldn't be good enough. But the versatility of being usable on the smaller Super Quant monsters as well means it won't be as dead as having Fist of Fate in your hand. And at number 6, we have 3 of a Kind. This is a trap card that can only be activated if you have 3 or more monsters in the field that have the exact same name, except for tokens. And if you meet these conditions, you get to target 3 cards your opponent controls and destroy them. So the card is actually a +2 in card advantage, as it gets rid of 3 cards for only using one of your own cards, as you don't have to consume any of the monsters you need on the field in order to accomplish this great effect. However, the condition is to have 3 monsters of the same name on your side of the field, which is incredibly difficult to accomplish. Even in decks with monsters who can change their name to the card, like the Cyber Dragon shown in the card artwork, have a hard time getting 3 cards of the same name on the field and keeping them there during your opponent's turn, where you're able to use this card. As having 3 targeted pops with 1 card is a very good effect, because it also works on spells and traps in addition to monsters. Although, with like all of these win more cards, the reason this card doesn't really see very much play is purely because if you can use it, you're probably in a pretty good board state anyway, where you don't need the kind of effect it offers. If it did a little bit more than just destroy 3 cards, it would probably be worth it, which is kind of hilarious considering destroying 3 cards is already a really good effect. And at number 5, we have Yata-Garasu. This is a level 2 spirit monster which was banned for almost 20 years, and recently came off the ban list without an errata. And after coming off the ban list, hasn't really seen any competitive play, purely because of the fact it's almost entirely a win more card in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Where it has the effect that if you inflict battle damage to your opponent skips their next draw phase. So if you manage to get ahead and get rid of all of your opponent's cards and then attack with Yata-Garasu, you can kind of lock them out of being able to come back in the game without the draw phase. However, if you're behind on board space, or in any other way, Yata-Garasu isn't a help at all because it can't be special summoned and only has that one battle related effect, with a pretty weak body of only 200 attack as well. If anything, nothing really encompasses a win more card like Yata-Garasu. If you're ahead and get the effect off, it can definitely make you more ahead. But the main reason this card has been so long on the ban list was purely because of how degenerate it can be rather than how good it actually is. And at number 4, we have Gouki Cage Match. This is a field spell for the Gouki archetype, which is an archetype that saw tons of competitive play. And what it does is, when it's activated, you place 3 counters on it. Then each time one of your Gouki monsters destroys one of your opponent's monsters by battle, you get to remove one of the counters from the card. And at the end of the battle phase, if the last of its counters was removed with its effect, you get to special summon as many Gouki monsters as you want with different names from your hand or deck, where you then get to place 3 counters on this card again, so you can try to get the effect off on your subsequent turns. So, if for some reason you have a clear field at the end of the battle phase, Gouki Cage Match can allow you to special summon 5 monsters from your deck, which is an incredibly good effect for a card to have. And with how much competitive play Gouki saw over the years, it may surprise you to hear this, but this card saw absolutely no competitive play within the archetype. And the reason for that kind of has to do with how the Goukis were actually played, where most of their competitive success was found in the fact that they all had floating effects that let you search out another Gouki card when they're sent from the field to the graveyard. So if you could find a way to get Gouki cards in the field, you could link climb like crazy until you ran out of hard once per turn searches. And since Goukis were mainly used as link climbing tools, you barely actually ended on any Gouki cards, which meant you weren't really destroying your opponent's monsters with Gouki monsters, so they wouldn't be able to use Cage Match anyway. There were later on some builds which did incorporate some actual Gouki monsters to enter the battle phase, but even then they wouldn't want to use this card because it just wasn't faster than playing Goukis without it. Although if you're already ahead in game state and had all the Gouki monsters just run over your opponent's cards, this would definitely assure that you would win more with its effect. And at number 3, we have Ghost Meets Girl, a Masterful Mayakashi Shiranui Saga. This is a trap card which requires you to tribute a Mayakashi or Shiranui Synchro or Link monster in order to activate its effect, where for the rest of the turn, neither player can special summon monsters from the hand, deck, or extra deck. So it's a full-on lingering effect lockdown from special summons, except from the banished zone or graveyard, which is generally where Mayakashis and Shiranui special summon from, or have effects relating to those two zones. Additionally, it has a graveyard effect, where you can banish it from the graveyard to return one of your banished monsters to the graveyard, which is actually pretty good with zombie support. Now, Ghost Meets Girl is definitely a lot more usable when it comes to all the other cards so far, and a lot of people thought it might actually see competitive play because the effect is just that good. However, it kind of highlights the problem with win more cards, and the fact that it doesn't actually help the base strategy of the archetypes themselves, and instead can only be added on top of what they already do. And since Shiranuis and Mayakashis aren't really competitive on their own, giving them a broken win more card isn't going to help that problem. There are cases where a single piece of card was added to an archetype and immediately made it become more successful, like with Mech Circular. But the reason that card works was because it supported the main engine and made the archetype itself just function better for existing. Whereas Ghost Meets Girl doesn't really contribute to Mayakashi or Shiranui plays, and just makes it so you have a very good floodgate if you do manage to get off their combos. However, the effect should not really be undersold. If you do resolve the card, there's a good chance you can actually win the game. The problem is just getting to a board state where you can get to that point in the first place. And at number 2, we have World Legacy Scars. This is a field spell card which has 3 effects. First, it increases the attack and defense of all Mech Knight monsters by 300. Secondly, it allows you to discard Mech Knights that were legacy cards in order to draw 1 card. And lastly, it has an effect where you can banish 8 different Mech Knight monsters from your graveyard or field in order to send your opponent's entire hand and extra deck to the graveyard. So if you're able to activate the last effect of World Legacy Scars on your first turn, you can kind of win the duel right there, because there's not too many decks that can come back from having their extra deck in hand sent to the graveyard. There are some decks which can play without an extra deck, and some which can play without a hand. Not too many can play without either of them. However, the effect is incredibly difficult to get off. And if you're in a position where you have 8 different Mech Knight cards in your graveyard, chances are the duel has been going on for a while, or you're in an advantageous position where you can just kind of win without the effect. However, there have been people who try to get off the effect anyway, and some people even found some success with trying to get off the effect on their first turn. So, out of all of these win more cards, this is one that actually kind of helps to a somewhat competitive win condition, just not competitive enough to see widespread use outside of a single top in 2022. And at number 1, we have the Six Shinobi. This is a trap card which can only be activated if you have 6 different Six Samurai monsters with different attributes, or you get the effect to skip your opponent's next turn. Now, this is the ultimate win more card, as it requires you to have a board state, which you would probably have won the game anyway, in order to give you a very powerful effect that will definitely assure you win the game. Getting 6 different monsters with different attributes on your side of the field is incredibly difficult, even if 6 Samurais have infinite loops with Gateway of the Six that allow them to summon as many monsters as they want per turn. However, even in 6 Samurai decks where they can use Gateway of the Six in order to summon as much as they want, they still won't use the Six Shinobi because it's so much easier to win in other ways. Because if you can summon as many 6 Samurais as you want on your turn, you generally don't want to waste them trying to set up the win condition of just getting the 6 Shinobi live. Because while skipping your opponent's turn is a very strong effect, you can also just fill a board full of unbeatable negates instead. Of course, if the 6 Shinobi was a spell card, this would probably be a different story. But since it is a trap that you have to set and wait for a turn before being able to use it, this means it's probably never going to see actual play. Alright, and that's the list. Are there any other win more cards that should have definitely been on this list that you think we may have missed, or have any ideas for future videos similar to this one? If so, I'd love to hear about them down below in the comments.